can see, right? All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our podcast on Conscious Creative Culture, a series dedicated to expanding the cultural narrative on art, design, and culture, specifically artworks and design that have been created to heal and expand our humanity. In our first season, we are interviewing creatives and social impact public health advocates working at this fascinating intersection. We are asking the questions, why art and design, why collaborate, and how can we better collaborate, and why now? The Conscious Creative Culture is a production of Taboo Health, and we are an emerging platform, community, and creative consultancy, starting a movement for collaboration between public health, art, design, and culture. Since 2017, our mission has been to use art and culture as a means of educating and increasing accessibility and fostering discussions regarding all aspects of human health and well-being at a collective level, or as we like to say, to make healing trend. I'm your host, Maria Chung, with my co-host, Rio Souza. We are your public health nerds and your cultural connoisseurs. Today, we are joined by our guest, Dr. Lynne Heller. Welcome. Hi. A little bit about Lynne. Lynne Heller is a post-disciplinary artist, designer, and educator and academic. Her interest encompasses both material and virtual culture, specifically AR and VR performance, graphic novels, and sculptural installations. Heller completed her MFA at the School of the Art Institution of Chicago in 2004 and her PhD in 2016 at the University of College Dublin, Ireland. Her research was practice-based with a specialty in feminism and digital media arts. She is an adjunct professor at OCAD University, co-director of the Data Materialization Studio, an affiliate member of Graduate Studies at the University of Toronto, and the review editor of Virtual Creativity. Whew. Dr. Heller, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. We're so excited to have the chance to learn more about your journey and discuss your present and past projects. So welcome.
Thank you. And it's an honor to be here with you and to be chosen for your first podcast series. I feel very woo.
Amazing. Yeah, oh, please. I mean, we're so grateful that we have such amazing people in this network and that we've come across. So amazing to have an opportunity to, really focus on what you're up to and to share with more people what I find certainly incredible and awesome and some great developments for this public health space, social impact space. So first off, love to ask you about Dobble Debate. I know once I reached out to you, I knew a little bit about your background ahead of time, and this was the first project that you said, oh, this is what you would love to share about. So please, can you tell us a bit about Dobble Debate?
Absolutely. I'll start just by giving you a little bit of history and context. So Dobble Debate was brought to OCAD University by Nina Sagladia, quite amazing curator, artist, facilitator, who it just seems to have the biggest network ever across the whole world. She's like one of these people that just kind of makes connections and brings people together in the best of ways. So she actually was working with someone named Lynne Hughes, Dr. Lynne Hughes, at Concordia University. And they came up with this concept. She brought it to OCAD University and me specifically. And since that time, which was 2015-ish, been working together on it. And it's certainly progressed tremendously. We've had several funding rounds that have really contributed to moving it forward. But in particular, the last one this previous year, where we were working with eCampus Ontario, and we had something called a Virtual Learning Strategies grant. And that really made a huge difference to the tools that we've been developing, etc. But maybe before I get even further into that, I should explain what it is. So Dobble Debate is basically a game that encourages people to talk about differing abilities, disability, and certainly we could get into a little bit of a discussion about that terminology, but basically we tend to use the word disabilities. Even though that's not overly comfortable all the time for everyone, it's vocabulary is a very contested area right now, but we certainly like to expand those notions of disability, absolutely. And we could even probably read through something that we have very prominently on our homepage for the game in order to kind of flesh that out a bit. But it's a game that is really more a set of tools, basically a set of different cards, decks of cards. And we have many different ways that this has been played. We've conducted workshops internationally, quite extensively here in Canada. And because of that, there's been many different iterations of the game. What we really encourage people to do is to take those tools that have been developed and kind of come up with their own gameplay. There's certainly a sense of creativity, a sense of learning about yourself and your own attitudes, learning about the world of disability studies, people who are interested in that. And that comes through this mechanism of trying to develop your own gameplay. We certainly have examples, and we do actually have something called Ready to Go, which is an example of how to play the game that you could just use out of the gate. But we really do think that maybe this process of thinking through how you would like to play the game is really a very much an added value kind of process and experimentation, and it evokes a conversation at a much different level than just playing the game. So that's kind of what Dobble Debate is. Right now we have 5 decks of cards. We used to have 3. But as I suggested, this last round really encouraged this whole other level of engagement with what we could do with those decks of cards. So, and would you like me to describe them? Would that make sense right now? So
please do describe them, the decks. Yes, okay. Please. Mm-hmm.
So our first deck of cards we call our ability cards, and they're really different descriptions of situations and life experiences that people have who live with disability on a daily basis. And we've had some controversy around kind of this idea of labeling, but we do in fact label. We do, for example, one card would be visually impaired people, or hearing impaired people, or people who live with wheelchairs and are wheelchair users. Another card might be something really interesting like, dyscalculia, which is the same thing as dyslexia, only with numbers. So there's a real range of both invisible disability, visible disability, as well as cognitive kinds of, and what we call neurodiversity, people who really think quite differently than what we typically think people should think like. And then also that can be combined with or separate from physical disability, which we also represent quite heavily in the cards. So that's kind of one deck of cards, and what they have on them is a title. As I said, that's sometimes quite contentious and leads to really interesting discussions. But we also have a few pointers about kind of typical ways that you think about something like visual impairment. Somebody can partially see or not see, not be able to see, and some of the things that go along with that physical condition. And as well, the cards are all have QR codes on them. So the ability QR codes lead you to more information. So we really encourage people to use those resources that they can access through the QR code. So that's that's our ability stack. And then we have a situation stack, and it's pretty fun. It's just different situations you could find yourself in, and some are quite fantastical, and some are quite everyday. Like public toilets would be an everyday one, or babysitting. And then on the other side, we have these the zombie apocalypse, for example, or really wild.
I love that.
Yeah, a Shark Tank. That's another favorite.
Right.
So those two decks were kind of the original decks that kind of would really, what we would do is get people to talk about having certain abilities within certain situations. So it led to some really creative thinking about how you navigate if you, in fact, are living with a disability. How do any of us navigate it? But anyways, there's this extra level of interest and creativity around navigating it with certain kinds of different lived experiences.
Yeah.
So then what we did, and the third deck is called Dobbles, and they're a point system that you can use within your gameplay. The two other decks that we developed are really the ones that I think there's lots of meat there. They're really ones that would help you very much in terms of imagining living with different disabilities, or help you be creative about how you problem solve or live your life if you do in fact live with disability. So one of them is a set of stories, and they're kind of about everyday innovation for the most part. And they were developed from our amazing, wonderful group of participants. We had community partnerships, and we had a range of people who, as I say, lived with many different kinds of lived experiences, such as blindness, partial sightedness, and then autism. People who lived, a number of two different people who lived with cerebral palsy and had to live their lives with their wheelchairs and their guide dogs, and different ways to facilitate them moving around in society and kind of typical physical situations. So this group, which they were just the best. I fell in love with everybody.
Oh, that's wonderful.
We'd always get so excited when we'd have a session. And we had very extensive sessions, I should say, with our community partners. We would meet with them for 6 hours. So there'd be like 2-hour session, maybe, 3-4 weeks would go by, and then we'd do another 2 hours, and then another 2 hours. And that gave people the ability to really think about what we had talked about, to kind of brainstorm with other people in their communities. It just gave everybody this really long period of time to get to know each other and not feel pressured about, bringing their experiences or their ideas to the project. So the stories came from people living with disabilities, as well as some of the team members who didn't necessarily identify with living with disability, but contributed, like in my case, I often trip over my words, and I there's been very funny situations when I've done that. So that was my story that I contributed. So that's a whole deck of cards that is really fabulous around inspiring people. I'll just tell you, for example, one of the stories that's on the cards, just to give you a sense of them. And this is kind of one that I've told a number of times because I feel like it represents so much about what we generally don't know if you don't live with disability, and also how people with disability really innovate on an everyday basis in order to kind of function in a typical environment. So this comes from Christine, one of our visually impaired participants, and she's been blind since she was a very young girl. And she told us, and this blew me away because I had never thought of it, but that often people who perhaps have strong religious feelings will want to pray for her in public space, like TTC, whatever, in order for her to get her sight back. And she says that isn't my day-to-day concern. That is just not, something that I particularly think about or need to happen. And so she was on a bus, and somebody indeed came up and said that they wanted to pray for her to get her sight back. And she said to them, well, actually, right now I'm really trying to lose weight.
I love that.
This person responded by, kind of this, she said there was this pregnant pause, and the person went, oh, Lord, please let the pounds melt away.
That would be a better use of your prayers. Thanks.
And he, to his credit, he turned the corner there and really responded to
very well
her dealing with that. And so, like that just is so emblematic for me of the things that I would never know, not having that particular experience that I have to live with, Right. And so good for other people to know and go, oh, I see.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, that was actually going to be my next question, was how much did you know about disability, or were you exposed to the world of disability even before this project? And clearly you've answered the following on, which would have been, how much have you learned? Sorry, where have you learned that from? You did share from your community group that you have been running these workshops with, but how much did you know beforehand?
I would not say I knew that much. It wasn't an area that I had studied particularly. Nina and I had connected in various ways and knew that we liked working together. Nina had worked with various projects that dealt with disability and was far ahead of me in terms of reaching out to people and having a network and having a better understanding. And I was kind of brought on board because, more design chops and, but since 2015, I would say my learning curve was kind of
I'm sure
wonderfully steep. And this last round, I would say just having all these hours talking to people, as I say, 15 participants, 6 hours per participant, it's just the kind of education that you can't get in school, that you can only get through this kind of project where you're working deeply with people, and they're really exposing their vulnerabilities and their strengths and their challenges and their victories. Another beautiful story is from Wes, who is a wheelchair user, quite severely incapacitated. He can't really use his arms too much. And he talks about his dad sort of coming up with this like spear-like thing because he was at university and he couldn't get the packaging. That plastic packaging that comes on food, and he couldn't get it off. So his dad, created this thing so he could stab his food and rip it open. And I'm like, oh my God, I need one of those. I can never get the damn packaging off. So, I would say And then we had a lot of other people as part of particularly this last round who, really study disability. It's their lives, academic lives. And so really, they talk to us an awful lot as well. Yeah.
Great community I hear that was around this project, and that get to be represented through these games and get their story told, which is so beautiful and so necessary. It just goes to show.
I should say please. Too, that those stories are not like, kind of dramatic, worked hard at finding the stories that some were quite dramatic and very, I get even emotional talking about them now. Things like Wes's relationship with his guide dog is a remarkable kind of expression of their relationship when he talks about that. But lots of others are funny or, completely creative or every day,
Yeah. It just goes to show that a card game like this that's been designed to represent will be able to share the everyday experiences that people have that others who are not in that world would maybe never know about or never be exposed to or have an awareness for. It's almost like, never having traveled or seen another culture, specific culture, and then suddenly you are exposed to them and their way, and it's different than yours, but it's another way, and that's it. So it's...
there's really a strong sense of that in the deaf community. They actually don't identify as having a disability. They tend to, I shouldn't generalize, this is so specific, but the people that worked with us would kind of talk a lot about deaf culture. And, we would obviously have sign language interpretation to talk to them. And the excitement, I used to be a dancer in another life very long time ago, but the excitement around using gestures, because, I sort of got to know a tiny bit about their gestures and how they would express themselves. And I always felt really kind of enlivened during those conversations because it really spoke to my need to move and to use you can tell I use my hands all the time. And that really, we were all doing it together, I'm obviously illiterate in terms of deaf culture, but I would start, really trying to talk.
Yes, of course. Trying to communicate with them and trying to be in their world. I mean, that's for another conversation, but I think it's quite sophisticated, isn't it? I know people that are like translators at concerts, and they translate an entire like rap song or like an entire song, and they keep up. They are keeping up with the artist in that expression, in that like tone of the song and of the lyrics as well. It's very impressive. But just to say that they're a culture of its own.
And those cards that the story cards, we call those spark cards because they kind of give you ideas and help you along. The spark cards have a QR code that takes you to the sign language interpretation done by one of our participants.
Oh, wonderful. Very nice. While we're speaking on... Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Rio.
I think that's a really cool point, just about how you're saying that there's some stories that are obviously emotional and dramatic and filled with a lot, and some that are just about everyday activities and like spark cards, they give you ideas. And I think there's so much conversation around disability that, like you said about those people on the bus, the one praying, the immediate idea that you should feel sorry for somebody, and that's not necessarily how they feel about themselves. And I think it's, like your game, is just very important to promote the idea that not everybody who has a disability is actually necessarily upset about it. And of course I can't speak because I don't have a disability, but I think that's so important that a game like this is shining light on all the actual capabilities they have, and that kind of like how in the media when there's stories around like a storytelling, like a gay coming out story, and then it focuses on the coming out story, but not just their regular day-to-day life. It's not all about being gay. They do other things that aren't gay, just like how disabled people do things that aren't strictly related to their disability. So I think that's a really cool aspect of this game.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I should say too that it was rare that anybody identified as on disabled. There was such a complex consideration around who they were. Some people, and we had someone who was transgendered, someone who really identified with the fact that they were a person of color. So people's identities, to reduce them down to kind of this one thing, was actually maybe a function of the fifth deck of cards that I haven't quite talked about yet. I'm not sure. Do you want me to talk about that, or
about the fifth deck of cards, please? Yeah. What were you saying about that?
Well, the fifth deck of cards really came out of a really important consideration, which was kind of how people identify, and really making sure that we kind of left that as open as possible. So the deck of cards that I'm referring to is the avatars. So how you represent yourself in the game, if indeed that's part of your particular gameplay. So we started off with kind of just like this notion is actually just something I came up with. Oh, we should use fish from under the water or whatever. But it quickly became apparent to us, talking with our visually impaired participants and co-creators, that wasn't going to cut it. They couldn't see what we were talking about. Often we would refer to colors, the pink blowfish or something, and they were like, no idea what pink is. It was just really like, whoa, okay, as somebody who's invested so much of my time in visuals, like that's my go-to color. And I was like, oh, of course, this isn't making sense for people. So we actually did design the cards, and there's still a lot of color on them. But what we did was we found sensations instead of specific kinds of things like fish, or things like sunlight and wind and ice, things that everybody can have an experience of. We also use things like coffee, and even if perhaps you had an issue with taste, which many people sadly have now because of COVID, there's still the jolt of the coffee and the heat of the coffee and what coffee means to most people in our culture. So those coming up with those ideas was really fundamental to that fifth deck of cards, and really does allow people to see what kinds of just leaves it open. Identity, it opens identity up so much more than we had previously thought about it. So
that is that's great. Again, just from a stepping outside of the ableist lens, that there's so many other senses that are available to us, and how much are we using them on the day-to-day. There's a TikTok trend right now of somebody who said, apparently, if you look at every item around you, you could probably ask yourself what that tastes like, and you would instantly know what the texture is, what the, I don't know, if that's healthy or safe for you or not. It's actually a very powerful sense. But obviously, and it probably goes back to us being babies and putting everything in our mouth just to understand our surroundings, right? But it's actually a very powerful sense that we have. So it's so great to actually bring in the other senses than ones that we more regularly rely on, like visual, especially for in the more normalist or majority world, ableist, dependent senses.
Yeah, and we did have a fabulous composer, Ted Carrick, who did our sound, and we had also somebody who animated for us. And so those things were really important to the people who had issues around sight, really wanted the sound. And people who had issues around hearing really benefited from this sense of animation or movement. So that's what we're able to do in this kind of, I'm going to use augmented reality in that those QR codes really allow you into a digital world that then augments the cards back and forth.
Yes. So that was the part that I was going to ask. So how does it work, just for the others who haven't played this game yet? How does it work to get into the VR, the augmented reality component of this game? How would they go about playing it that way?
So if you go to game.doubledebate.com, and I think you're going to probably
share that after.
Share links. It really guides you through it, I think, pretty extensively. We have an educator's guide. We call it Bake Your Own. So you can go in there and you can download all the cards. You can print them yourself. I did a workshop in Montreal in the spring, and I printed out the cards and took them. And it was really fun because we all started with these little, kid scissors cutting out the cards from, it was like just this group activity that we could all do together to get us going. And there's many ways to use those assets. And then we do have an online version called the Ready to Go game. And that one is, it's sort of the first game that we developed. And as I say, it's kind of almost an example in order just to get your juices going, in order to get you to figure out what you want to do. So we have quite a few examples of other things that people have suggested. And so it's a absolutely perfect resource for any number of educational interactions. Or
I was just going to ask, so who is this game for? Like, who would download this? Who is the audience of this game, or who would be initiating these games?
Right. So our grant was really mandated us to create for post-secondary education in Ontario. But I am absolutely sure we, just in our travels over these many years that we've been working with it, we've had intergenerational, we've had, a real range of cultures engaged with the game. Obviously, a range of people with different disabilities or abilities. So I would say that it would be quite useful. For example, I was talking to a primary school teacher, and they just said just having these decks of cards around for them would be amazing because, often perhaps if children ask them about something specifically, and then they know that they have a deck of cards where, you wonder what it's like for someone who can't see. Okay, here's a story for you, and then they could use the deck of cards in such a different way than intended. They could use it as just a plain old resource. Right. But also they could, find a way to play some kind of simple card game at that level that really would help, perhaps help children understand more fully what it means to live with this various kinds of disability. But I wouldn't really limit it to age. Right. I think it's so flexible. And culturally, it seems to translate in really interesting ways. Fortunately, here in North America, I know we have a long way to go, but we do have somewhat a certain sector of society that is really coming to terms with what has historically been an abysmal approach to disability. And so, culturally that's not necessarily reflected in other places, and that's been really interesting. For example, when we went to Mexico with it, people were quite interested in taking the game and kind of pushing it into ideas like civil disobedience, and they really went nuts with it in terms of, well, we could do other things with the concept. So culturally it's been fascinating.
And I even wonder on that point whether that would also help with some health misinformation. Sometimes in certain cultures, disabilities can be seen as like tied to religion, tied to being like cursed, tied to more, it could be quite elaborate sometimes in certain cultures too, and therefore cause health misinformation actually, and therefore, becoming more segregated in community than even in everyday life, right? So I could see how culturally it might be quite impactful in other places, maybe more than others, like in some places more than others too.
Yeah, very much. We had some really interesting experiences, one in the UK and one in Poland. And in the UK, during our workshop there was a lot of pushback. We had some disability activists as part of that workshop, and there was a lot of pushback against those labels and calling people, this is you, kind of. And so they came up with some really interesting ways of working with the cards in order to highlight that. And then in Poland, we had this, it was fascinating. We had quite an extensive workshop there, and people seemed really interested in story. It seemed every single one of these games that they came up with were really narrative based. So, I'm not sure.
Never know.
That's too small a market segment,
right.
Make pronouncements from. But
speaking of culture, I know we spoke about this in our pre-meet, but what are your thoughts on making disability and the language around ableist language? It's been coming up in culture and the music world. Beyonce recently, and Lizzo before that, is now editing their music because they were using some ableist language in there. What are your thoughts on that, and how can a game like this even help dispel or make a dent in this conversation?
Fortunately, Lizzo and Beyonce will make a far bigger dent than Dobble Debate will ever hope for. But their responsiveness has been quite heartening. But it's certainly, no one ever learns from being lectured or their, kind of finger wagging. Nobody, all you do is you tighten up, there's an immediate need to protect your ego when you've been chastised, it's just human nature, it feels like. So if you can open things up in a much more fun space, such as music or what we're doing with cards, it's huge. It's just, if I learn something through being lectured, I will forever carry that other kind of feeling with me along with it, But if I learn something through fun and gaming, that just becomes part of who I am. And I don't, I associate it with a really lighthearted feeling rather than a kind of, a guilt feeling, which guilt is, oh boy, it can be so destructive if people, if that's their primary reaction to trying to open up to the space of disability, if it is guilt. Everything in life kind of adds to people's learning and growth, certainly. Absolutely. Negative feelings, you can't get rid of them entirely. You know, that's just, you know,
The discomfort.
But certainly I know that learning through fun and games is so much more effective.
Absolutely. It makes it light, it makes it enjoyable. It doesn't make it as severe if you get it wrong. You know, and at the same time, you're actually learning and becoming more aware, believe it or not. Even if they're not conscious to that, they're learning, right? Which is actually even more powerful in a lot of ways. So, yeah, great points. I'm going to move along. We actually wanted to ask your very wide experience in this intersection. So wanted to understand a little bit more of the different, as someone who's worked in all these different media, textile, animation, graphic novels, you know, VR, photography. Are there any media that you found have lend themselves better to communicating health, science, or this more educative content?
Yeah, well, we talk about this a lot with Dobble Debate in particular because, you know, my big joke is I've never met a fence I wouldn't sit on because I just love to be in a different kind of space. So between materiality and digitality is something that I've always really been invested in, both quite intimately, as you said, textiles. You know what that means. I'm just writing a piece now with another collaborator, Tricia Crevella, which it's called A Love Letter to Ironing. And we're really talking about our love, this kind of sensual engagement with materials. But on the other hand, the digital medium is so immediate. It's, you know, it's a bit endless. It can, you know, it can do so much more than, you know, if I just handed you a pack of cards, but I hand you a pack of cards that have QR codes on, then your horizons have expanded. So, yeah, I would say that I just can't abandon or concentrate on one or the other ever. I just really need to kind of find what each does best and try and exploit it. I should say that space. But I'd also say that I have still a deep belief, like textiles was my life for many years. And just having a really deep knowledge of a craft process, I think is so fruitful and so productive for my work. Even if now I almost always just work digitally, but that knowledge and skills, hand skills. I always try and encourage my students to learn to crochet, so that when I'm giving talks or lectures in a liberal arts course, they can crochet at the same time. Because, I mean, who knows what they'll absorb from what I'm saying? Probably very little, honestly. But they will come out with a hat, or they'll come out.
Right. Oh, I love it. Yeah, but also, multitask, why not? And learn a skill at the same time.
Yeah.
And then reflect on it.
As helps us very much. It calms people down to use their hands.
Right.
It helps them focus and concentrate on what you're saying. It's quite important that way. But yeah, so me jumping around everywhere, partly it's just who I am, but partly it's because I feel like it's the smart thing to do. Like, for me.
And I love that you've been able to merge the two and give something tangible for those who like something tangible still, and then something digital to, you know, allow for that immediacy or for that immersion online if they wanted an app to go with it, if they wanted something clickable, if they wanted something immersive, you know, then there's like something digital as well. That's great. It sounds like you're using the different media for different purposes and then, you know, mixing them where it works. So that's great.
Yeah. And also I would just say that, you know, as I say, I don't want to emphasize that, this is the way to go for everybody. And that's something that's really important to emphasize when people are coming up with solutions, healthcare solutions or whatever, they really have to be a piece of you as well as what people need in the outside world, like design. I truly believe that, sometimes we get into this very audience centric kind of, oh my God, what are their needs? And that's really crucial. But also, if you're giving of yourself, if you're really expressing some things that you love and need, like, in my case, this kind of fun balance I love, between the digital and the material, then whatever you're creating is just more real. It's more, I just think it has a better chance in the real world if it's invested in you, if that makes sense.
That's so great. No, I love what you're saying about that. It's kind of related to, like, I've heard, this is a slight tangent, but people finding their purpose. And if you do something that you love, it'll end up being a part of your purpose in the world, because people just see the joy that you have when you offer that thing that you love doing anyways. It's just an extension of you, as opposed to trying to satisfy other people's needs. If you find something, somewhere in between both what people need and what you're genuinely loving to do anyways, that would be like that sweet spot, is what I'm hearing. And I'm sure that's even more, I think it's valuable in many different ways, but even more so probably in the creative space, where there's like different media, that most creative people that I know are dabbling in a number of different media, or a couple of different avenues of that expression. So, really honing on what is your style or your craft, your unique, twist to something. It probably takes something to hone that as well, doesn't it?
It totally. I mean, it's years of, what is it? Being in the saddle, and getting back up into the saddle when you get tossed out of it, it's just, I mean, that, just to make it, to nuance that a little bit, this idea that kind of, creative things are fun, like so much of the time they're fun, don't get me wrong. But also, like today, I just spent hours like doing battle with pixels and numbers, because I'm trying to create a very high resolution thing in VR. So much of it is just really hard work. So I do want to communicate that even though there's a certain degree of creativity in everybody, and it's expressed in many different ways, to actually become a designer or a game designer, putting in those hours and that hard work just means that you're bringing so much more to the table when you work with other people. I kind of resist the, everybody's creative. Like, they are, truly. But they're also skills, like, years of noticing different colors and color combinations. Just a skill like that is something you can't short circuit it. You can't learn it overnight. You can't, and if you don't have it, then that means that you just have less tools to work with, So as a creative person, you're often just gathering more and more tools or skill sets.
Well said.
Yeah. But
so this actually brings me. Sorry, go ahead.
Yes.
Yeah. What I'm hearing is you're refining your abilities, really, and getting more and more attuned to what those unique abilities are as a creative, especially if finding a niche, finding special abilities, like you said, and then knowing your process to kind of hone that as well. I'm sure it's might be different for different people. So really identifying and trusting that. I'm going to jump ahead because you're actually bringing me to this other section, which is, do you have advice or tips for somebody, say, for example, an artist, particularly who's looking to take on more socially charged topics, Like you said, for example, for you, I mean, you're a designer in this case, but wasn't as exposed to disability and then, dove right into this. I've come across a couple of other creatives as well who have been wanting to make that shift, but can be, quite intimidating sometimes too. What would be your advice or tips on that?
Yeah, well, my experience with this last round was so enlightening. So absolutely to find a community and to spend time with that community if you really want to in some way either express your generosity or you want to find work. Sometimes it's quite practical. Oh, this is an area where people are hiring. This is something that I know I can get good at, that kind of thing. So there's nothing wrong with a whole, a myriad reasons for pursuing something. And certainly it doesn't always have to be altruistic. It doesn't always have to be, all these different things. People are so, from moment to moment, their inner lives are so complex, There's really no way that you could kind of nail down one motive for doing something. It's not the way our brains work, We really do jump around. I think, in yoga or something, they call it monkey brains, when you're trying to quiet your brain down.
Right.
Boop, boop, boop.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't ever discourage somebody if they didn't know much about a community and just thought, oh, this is an area that needs people, my goodness. But on the other side of that, it's just so easy to kind of blunder around if you're not listening well, if you're not taking the time, if you think you know the answers. Oh boy, it's mistake the other. If you kind of blow in somewhere, going, oh, let me fix it, Once again, these systems are so complex, these communities that have, I'm thinking particularly about our participant Myra, who was quite involved with CNIBC and, I think I said that wrong. Anyway, you can, know what I mean, the Canadian Institute for the Blind. So she talked a lot about like the way that they function there, and at one point they had an architect come in and really do a number on their building that didn't make any sense for them, and it was just a really clear example of the design industry kind of roaring in and going, let us do, well, we know, blah blah blah. Anyway, it did not work out well for them, and so that's huge. We always keep that in mind, that people have come, even if they seem inefficient, their solutions or odd, or it's just, you have to keep trying to figure out why it is that they decided that was the best way to do things.
So I'm really hearing listening, being curious, and being of service, but coming from a place of really understanding, the people and their challenges in that group. If you're looking to, offer your skills and your craft to this community, but first and foremost, hear their challenges and get their world is what I'm really hearing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You said it beautifully.
Okay.
Yes.
Amazing. No, that's great. I'm also going to bring us to, you're also an educator. What have you seen are maybe some trends in education, particularly at this intersect? What are your thoughts on that? And maybe even in some of the students of the cohorts, maybe what their interests are, or where would you like, maybe even your students one day to be working? Would love your thoughts on that.
Sure. Like everything, education is such a complex thing to sum up in any kind of nutshell, so I won't try and do that. Some observations that have come my way. COVID has done such a number on education at every level. It's just been a really, it's been devastating so much of the world for so many reasons, but particularly for children, losing time in educational systems. So that's been really something that's constantly on educators' mind right now, I think, is how do we recover from that? How do we respond to the changes that occurred? For example, online learning, it's just here to stay, and it's here because it was slowly, certainly not even so slowly, I guess it was, kind of this wave happening, but it just crested during COVID. Everyone was like, okay, we're online here.
Yes.
And
but I mean, what about in your students who are choosing to take on, say VR for a social impact topic, or they want to try and do textiles and potentially somehow apply their textiles technique to a social impact? Has that come up at all?
Constantly. The one thing that's just amazing about teaching, in my case, would be a couple generations down, actually, not just the next generation, but is the consciousness that certainly people who were born after me bring to the table that, I just had no idea about. We lived in a different time and place, myself personally, and so this real awareness is so different, and I don't know how widespread. I teach at a university, and so I'm talking about people 18 years of age, kind of up to maybe 30. That's a fairly specific age group. But the consciousness is so far ahead of, say, people who, even were active in the 70s, because, I was certainly active in many ways in the 70s with social impact and social kinds of considerations, but it's a whole different ballgame. I was just talking to two guys who were in their early 20s, and they're both vegetarians, vegan almost. That was not, lots of people kind of, I guess not so much. Yeah, it's just whenever you talk to people of that age group, they're taking on the world, they're taking on the environment, they're taking on, all kinds of different ways of seeing people and particularly identity. So sometimes, you get a little worn out. You're like,
really? It's on everybody's minds. Yeah.
But they do, that's their reality. And it's really good for me.
Yeah, it's refreshing. It's kind of like nice to know that there's still hope, that people out there are not completely jaded, especially the younger generations. They're looking to get involved. And I mean, I'd also love to know, what do you think are the particular role or contribution that more creative contributions can make to these social impact issues, challenges?
Well, you just notice in the arts today that so much of this is becoming prevalent and necessary in the arts. It's no longer art for art's sake. That's completely gone. And I was just at, for example, the Venice Biennale, and it's 90% women or gender fluid artists who are represented. So certainly in the arts, there's this really strong consciousness about a need to no longer kind of live in your own world. You're really, artists today often work collaboratively. I don't know if you know about another major art show. It's called Documenta. It happens every 5 years in Kassel, Germany. I also went to that as well in Europe. And it was curated by a collective who then brought on other collectives. So there ended up being like 1,500 artists involved in this show, like just amazing. And it was really like just spread. And also it was, there was very few global North artists. It was primarily global South. So that consciousness in the art world is huge. And then of course, that trick, more than trickles out, that really, informs ways that collectors collect and curators curate. The Venice Biennale often introduces, people in ways that establish their careers, for example. And the fact that, the gender balance was so interesting. That will have its resonances in the art world, and then of course the larger world.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I mean, like we say here, we're coming from an angle of culture as well, but culture and public health or social impact. So, we're questioning essentially what role is the content in culture actually probably affecting consciously or subconsciously our values, our way of being, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable anymore. So you're just pointing out that there are waves, even if they're happening in bubbles, but there's probably like ripple effects from that too. And you pointed out a couple of layers of that too, from education to curators to, people that have the money, that are investing in this and talking about this. So I love that you're pointing that out as well. We do this wrap up because I'm noticing the time now. So last two sections, this is an opportunity to really showcase your work. You've shared so much about Dobble Debate. Are there any groups out there that you haven't yet worked with that you would love to work with?
So interesting. That I would love to work with. Well, I think that with Dobble Debate, we certainly had a lot of representation, but I can imagine even reaching out even more. For example, one of our participants who was deaf encouraged us to reach out to people who are both deaf and blind. And I remember honestly feeling daunted by that because I was administering everything. So in terms of organization, it's just it's added complexity if you need to find people for interpretation, find different ways to communicate. And that's exactly what I was there for. So no complaint. But I just remember thinking to myself, okay, that is amazing, and can I really make that happen? Can I, find more money? Can I really find the people who really challenge me to step up my game in terms of administering and creative responses and innovation? So that would be of interest to me. And then also, here in Canada, we would love to be able to translate the cards into French first off, and then obviously, it would be quite amazing to engage with people from Native communities, Indigenous people. I don't know. Once again, it would be a whole process. It wouldn't be just like, oh, here's the cards, translate them. It just doesn't. It would be, we would have to really consider them within different contexts and talk to those people about what they would envision. But yeah, I can imagine that being, language. It's really thought a lot about this in terms of sign language, because we actually use something called International Sign Language instead of American Sign Language, because They're once more inclusive, the
Mm-hmm.
international.
Mm-hmm.
So we were really like, my goodness, to translate into a different language, American Sign Language, was a huge chunk of the budget, was a huge chunk of our time. Really critical and completely wonderful, but yeah, that would be really interesting.
Great. So for everybody who just heard that, if anybody's interested in collaborating to help translate this Dobble Debate in French, or even anybody who is from the Indigenous community who would love to also participate in this project, you can reach out to us, and you'll have the contacts for Lynne in the show notes. So that's where you can find out about more of that project and get in touch with Lynne. All right. In the last couple of minutes, we like to have a quick fire round of questions just to keep it light and fun. So if you're ready, here we go.
I'm ready.
Okay. If you were to have dinner with any celebrity or historical figure, past or present, who would that be?
Frederick Nietzsche.
Ooh. Okay. And why?
When you read him, and I haven't read him very, very extensively, but it's this kind of combination of directness, like this kind of idea of aphorism, or being able to really summarize something with a word or a phrase, combined with incredibly deep, complex thinking. And, you often do that when you're teaching. I think you strive to do that. So just the way that I've always imagined his mind worked or something, it would be really beyond incredible to sit down with him and just to hear it from the horse's mouth, as it were.
Yeah. Okay, amazing. Love it. If you weren't in your current field, and if you could have another career or job, what would you see yourself doing? Anything that we don't know?
Me and my, I think I'd be a scientist.
Yeah. I mean, you're fairly close. It wouldn't be a huge pivot. Wouldn't be a huge pivot, would it? But okay. So getting deeper into the scientific methods and all of that. Okay. Love it. What was the last time that you experienced content, art, or design that felt like a microdose of healing?
Oh, of healing.
Or awareness, if not healing.
Awareness?
Yeah.
I think, just these experiences I just had in Venice at the Biennale or Documenta. We saw one piece at Documenta that was just so brilliantly done, and it spoke to me a little bit because it was around textiles. So it was around the industry, the secondhand clothing industry, where I'm not sure if you guys know much about it, but I didn't know a ton, but I learned certainly through this piece. But all our cast-off clothes are bundled together, and we think maybe we're giving them to charity or some other kinds of ways that they get disposed of, and then they get shipped off to Africa. And they're they do a lot. They're quite destructive environmentally and economically. So there was an amazing piece at Documenta where they built up a structure using those bales of I think they even have a whole system for sorting things before they get baled. So you'll see a bale of T-shirts, and these are all fast fashion
pieces.
Really discardable and cheap. They had that structure, and then you went into the structure and you saw these really amazing interviews with people from different countries in Africa talking about their relationship to this industry, and really hard political truths about things like what the Trump administration did to undermine countries that would push back against what that industry was doing to their social, economic, political, economies.
Right, space.
So that was
Wow.
that was an
Wow.
amazing piece. Yeah.
I can hear that it was both a piece that you could feel as well as learn a lot about and directly from the people as well. So
And
it's
smells,
layers
it
to
really
that. Yeah.
felt like you were up against veiled clothing, and there's a particular kind of it was, and it was quite aesthetically impactful. Yeah, I mean, there was a lot at Documenta that would kind of blow you away politically, and
right.
That as a discrete piece,
that's
the one that,
yeah.
and also it's textiles, so.
Yes, of course. It spoke to you as being textile. I love it. See, another reason why, I feel like even if the topic has been addressed before in one format, that there's no harm in addressing it in another format. It might speak to somebody else in a way that didn't speak to that, them if it was in another format. So I love that you just pointed that out too.
Yeah.
Okay, what is something that the child version of yourself would be most proud of today?
Oh, that I kind of known for laughter. Yeah, it seems so like, sweet. If I go, I went to visit some friends. I was just recently in Nova Scotia, and I went into the house, and one of the friends was outside, and I laugh a lot. And he came in and he goes, I know that laugh anywhere. That's so often in my life. If I go visit and people are reminded that that's what I do. So yeah.
That's sweet. That's sweet. Keeping that laughter and keeping that lightness and that fun and play and joy. I love that. That's great. And what comes to mind when we say let's make healing trend?
Can you explain that?
Yeah, just the first thing that comes to mind when we say let's make healing trend.
Oh, make healing trend, of course. Well, I would say that, there's just no getting around social media. Obviously, the word itself, trend, the tremendous power of people's need to always communicate. That's the basis for trends. It's like, I always marvel at when you're young, how easy it is to absorb what's happening in popular culture on the ground. You don't have to work at it. You're like, I know the songs, I know that, blah, blah, blah. And, so kind of that ability is something that we all need in our communities. You have to know the gossip, you have to know what's going on. It's like a very human need, and that's, I think, what trending is based on. Really not, being part of the social pack. And that pack behavior is, it's, you can see it in dogs, you can see it in people.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So hearing, just knowing that we're social beings. And acknowledging that we're social beings. Yeah. Love that. Okay, good. Amazing. And on that note, thank you so much, Lynne. This has been an absolute pleasure to dive deep into your amazing work and your career. I'm so grateful to have time to chat with you and to learn more. I hope this inspires other people out there to get into, this intersection. If it's been something on your mind, or if you've been wondering, what other ways we could be educating or inspiring others for a public health or social impact topic, here's another way, through gaming, and play. What amazing way to do that, right? And it can be applied in so many different places, from education to in your home to just conversations with your friends. That's what I really got from today, which is a lot. That's amazing. Thank you so much again. Again, in our show notes, we'll have all the links to Lynne's projects, and you'll know how to find her. So everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. And thank you again, Lynne.
Thank you guys so very much.
Thank
It was
you.
a complete
Amazing.
delight.
Wonderful. All right. Bye.
Bye, guys.